Our CentOS journey continues in yet another episode of Learn CentOS. Today, I'm going to be talking to you guys about concepts related to storage. For example, how do you add an additional storage volume to your CentOS installation? How do you make it available for use? And other concepts that are related to storage. That's the plan in today's video. I want to give a special shout out to all of my patrons out there who have chosen to support my channel. Thank you so much. If you're a patron and you're watching this on YouTube, then you've already seen this video, because whenever possible, I always put my tutorials up on my Patreon page before they even end up on YouTube as early access videos. Now, whether you are a patron or not, thank you so much for checking out my content and being a part of this community. I really appreciate it. Now let's go ahead and talk about storage in CentOS. So here on my laptop, I have a terminal open and I'm going to show you guys, like I mentioned, all the concepts you need to know to manage storage. Now, this being a laptop, I have the benefit of using the GUI tools that CentOS provides to manage storage. I'll show you those. But quite a few CentOS installations don't have a GUI at all. So I'm also going to show you the command line methods as well. Now, what I'm going to do right now is simulate the process of adding a storage volume to the CentOS machine. So it doesn't really matter if you have a CentOS virtual machine and you just add another disk, or you have a physical server or desktop and you just add a hard drive right inside the case. Or if you're like me, you'll just totally cheap out and plug in a flash drive like I'm about to do right now. Now I'm going to switch to an empty workspace here. And you can see right up here at the top of the screen, I received a notification that I just inserted a 16 gigabyte volume. Obviously, it goes without saying, if you are on a server, which most likely doesn't have a GUI at all, then you probably won't see any notification whatsoever. Now what I'm going to do is open a bundled utility called GNOME Disks. So if I press the super key and then I start typing the word disk, it should show up, and here it is. If you've installed CentOS with the GNOME desktop, then you'll automatically get this application right here, which is the default GUI method of managing storage. Now right away, we see the main hard drive right here. It's a 500 gigabyte SSD, a Samsung 850 EVO if you're curious. And this is basically where the root file system is, or basically the CentOS distribution itself. Now I'm going to ignore these block devices and focus here on this 16 gigabyte drive, which is the flash drive that I just inserted. And again, it doesn't matter what kind of storage you inserted into your computer, or even if you're on a VM and you just added another virtual disk, it should all work exactly the same. Now up here, I do have an eject button if I wanted to eject the highlighted disk. Here we can see we have an ext4 file system that is taking up the entire flash drive. Now what I'm going to do is just wipe it out and recreate everything. So obviously you wouldn't do this if you had important data on your flash drive or whatever it is you inserted, but I'm going to show you guys the process from the beginning. So I'm going to click this minus button right here to delete that partition. It's the only partition we actually have. I'll go ahead and delete it. And now we have basically nothing on this flash drive at all whatsoever. Now creating a partition is easy. All I have to do is click the plus icon, and I could choose how much space I want to give the partition. I'm just going to allow it to take the entire flash drive. Volume name, I'll just call mine backup because, I don't know, I can't think of anything better to call it. And this option right here is going to overwrite existing data. I've gone ahead and blanked it out. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to leave that off. Then we get a choice of what type of file system we want to give this flash drive. I'm going to choose ext4. Now, ext4 is supported by Linux only. So if you want to use your flash drive on Mac and Windows, for example, you probably don't want to use this option. But I pretty much always use extended for in my case because I only use Linux, so there's never going to be a situation where I'm not going to be able to read an ext4 file system on a flash drive. But you know what? If you are intending to use it on other operating systems, you probably want to choose this option right here. I'm just going to go ahead and leave it as an ext4 file system. And if this is an internal hard drive that you are connecting to your workstation or server, then you probably do want to go with extended 4. So I'll click Create. And you can see we have what looks like a little wheel down here on the bottom left. I don't know how well you guys will be able to see that in the video. It's quite tiny. And the indicator light on the flash drive is going crazy right now, which tells me it's probably still not done formatting it just yet. And in fact, I know that because down here it says creating file system. So I'll go ahead and wait, and then I'll be right back as soon as it's done. And there we go. That didn't take too long. Now what I'll do is eject it. Then I'll remove it from the laptop. And you can see that when I did remove it from the machine, it took it away off the list on the left. So now I'm going to go ahead and reinsert it. And there we go. We get the little alert that I did insert this flash drive. It's called backup, just like I named it. And that seems to work just fine. So now I'm going to talk to you guys about the concept of mounting an additional storage volume. So to illustrate that, first of all, I'll close this and then I'll bring up a file manager window. And it's already mounted. So we're done. That's it. That's all there is to it. Just insert it and we're ready to go. Okay, so actually there's a lot more to it than that. But if you are using the GUI version, basically if you have GNOME installed and you insert a flash drive, it's going to go ahead and mount it automatically. So if I go ahead and click on it, we can see that it's empty, which, that kind of makes sense because I did just format it. And we can go ahead and create content on that device. And there we go. I created a test folder right on that flash drive. So I was able to mount it and use it. So where exactly, though, is this flash drive mounted, and what do I even mean by that? So if I right-click an empty portion of the file manager window, then click Open in Terminal, you can see that I am in the backup directory. I can do pwd to see exactly where that flash drive is mounted. So if you are using the GNOME version of CentOS, then basically it's going to auto-mount something like a flash drive or an external hard drive to /run/media, your username, and then whatever the label of that flash drive happens to be. If there is no label, it might just show it as a bunch of gobbledygook characters, but don't worry about it, beyond the scope of this video. But we can see where it auto-mounted the flash drive. So another thing that I can do is do ls-blk, and that's going to give me some additional information about the storage volumes that are attached to my machine. Now pay attention here to mount point. Right here we have a single /, which you probably remember from the very beginning of our series. That means that's the root file system. And it even says that right here. And then we have swap and then we have home, which means that the device called SDA is the main hard drive of the machine, and that's very common. Now SDA1 refers to partition number 1 on SDA and then partition number 2 on SDA. So if we run a command directly against SDA, we're targeting the entire hard drive. Or we could run a command against SDA1 to target the first partition and then 2 for the second. Now here we see that we have a device named SDC, which actually is the flash drive, and we know that. It's auto-mounted right here to that path, the path that I just showed you. And that partition is SDC1. So if I wanted to unmount that flash drive from the command line, maybe I was too lazy to open a file manager window, or maybe I don't even have a file manager at all, then I could go ahead and run sudo umount, and it's short for unmount, but the absence of the N is intended. Then I could do /dev SDC1, because that is the partition that's mounted. I'll press enter, put in my super secret password here, and the device is unmounted. If I do an ls against run media, my username, and then backup, there's no file or directory of that name. So it did remove it from the system. Now, if I refresh this command right here, we can see that it does actually still list it, but it's not mounted. So if I was going to use something like DD to write an image to SDC, I can unmount it just to make sure that there's no open file handles, and then I can use the DD command to write an image to the flash drive. And I'm not going to go over that in this video, but if you do get into advanced storage, you probably will be using the disk duplicator or DD command to back up a disk to an image or maybe restore a disk from an image. Now we can get some additional information if we run the fdisk-l command with root. The fdisk utility is something that we can use to manually partition the flash drive, which I will show you. But I'll press enter because -l means, well, list. And here we have some information. We have disk/dev/sdc. It's showing that it's a 14 gigabyte device here, basically a 16 gig flash drive. And it's giving me some information about the partitions that are on the device. We have one, SDC, like I mentioned before. And then here at the end, it shows us the partition type, and it's a Linux partition type. If I scroll up a little bit here, we can see dev SDA, which again is the SSD, the main hard drive. We have these two partitions right here. The first one is of type Linux. The second is Linux LVM. Now I have an entire video dedicated to LVM, or Logical Volume Manager, that I highly recommend that you check out. If you want to know what the heck that means, or even if you do know what that means and you want to dive in even deeper, I have some content on that. Go ahead and check that out. Now, SDC1, this partition here, is not mounted. Another way to know that is we could simply run the mount command with no options and press enter. And it's going to list everything that's mounted on the system, but it's going to list quite a bit of stuff here. So we can actually narrow that down a bit. We can grep for SDC, which is going to show no output because that device and none of its partitions are mounted. It only has one partition, but anyway, it's not mounted. Now, I could just grep for SDA, and we can see that we do have /dev/SDA1 mounted, and it shows us where it's mounted. So if you were curious what is mounted and where it's mounted, the mount command can give you all the output that you would need to know what is mounted on your system. We'll get back to the video shortly, but I wanted to take a moment to mention my sponsor, Linode. Linode has been my infrastructure provider for well over a year now, and has just recently announced their own managed Kubernetes service. Now you can combine Linode's ease of use and simple pricing with the infrastructure efficiency of Kubernetes. With the Linode Kubernetes engine, you can get your infrastructure and workloads up and running in minutes instead of days, and scale resources in real time to meet your infrastructure needs. With Linode's managed Kubernetes engine, pricing is simple. Only pay for what you use. And with Linode's 99.9% uptime SLA and bundled transfer, you can significantly cut costs when compared to AWS, GCP, and Azure. Designed with the open source ecosystem of Kubernetes, the Linode Kubernetes engine supports integration with tools like Helm, operators, and more. To help you get started with Kubernetes, Linode gives you access to in-depth documentation, video tutorials, and webinars. Go ahead and sign up at linode.com/learnlinuxtv to get a $60 60-day credit to test out LKE or any other of Linode's products. I really appreciate Linode's continued support of Learn Linux TV, so go ahead and check them out. You won't regret it. Now, let's get back to the video. Okay, so how would we actually mount a hard drive on the system if we don't have a GUI? So I'm going to go ahead and maximize this terminal here, and let's dive into that. I'm going to go back to my home directory here. So again, If I do lsblk, I do still have this right here that I can mount. Now, an obvious place to mount the device on the system, and if I go ls-l against the root of the file system here, we have a dedicated directory right here, /mnt. Media is often used for system-wide mount points that are basically external hard drives and things like that, basically removable storage. And then mount, or MNT, is usually a good place to mount something if you want it to stick around for a while. So what I'm going to do is sudo mount /dev/sdc1, because I want to mount the first partition, well, the only partition. And then we need to give it a target. Where do I want this flash drive, hard drive, whatever it is, to be available from? And I could just do this, /mnt. And again, I do need sudo because I am altering the file system here, so I'll press enter. And it doesn't seem like it actually complained or anything, so if I run mount, you can see at the end, it actually is mounted. So to make that easier to see, I will grep for SDC. And there we go. Now another command we can run, of course, is good old df-h, which is going to show all the file systems that are mounted, just like I showed you earlier. And we can see that SDC1 is mounted here at /mnt. And if I list the storage, it's actually showing that test directory that I created earlier. Now what I'm going to do is unmount that flash drive yet again. And you can see that there's nothing there anymore. So let's go ahead and walk through the process of manually partitioning a flash drive, storage volume, whatever you have. So since we're going to be making permanent changes here, we do need sudo. And the command that I'm about to show you is extremely important that you be careful with it because it can cause damage to your system and your installation. So just be careful. So I'm going to run fdisk. And before we ran -l, but actually what I'm going to do is run it against SDC. Notice I didn't put 1 here because I want to manipulate the entire storage device. I don't really want to target a particular partition, so I'll press enter. Now we have our fdisk shell right here, and we can use this to do various things. I could do p for print, and it's just going to show you the contents of the storage volume, basically what partitions it's going to have there. So now what I can do is press M for help if I'm at all curious what all the various options are. But what I want to do is create a new partition table. Doesn't matter if you do GPT or DOS, it's just 16 gigs, whatever works. So I'm just going to do O for DOS just to keep it simple. Enter. And if I do P for print, we can see that it has no partitions. There's nothing down here. But nothing actually happened yet. This device still has its partition on it, but if I do W for write, that makes it permanent, and those changes are now applied. So if I do sudo fdisk-l, you see, sure enough, we don't have any partitions here. So let's go ahead and fix that. And again, I'll do P for print. We're starting out with an empty slate here. I'll do N for new. And I'm going to create a primary partition, which is the default. You can have up to 4 of those. If you want to have more than that, you're probably better off using GPT, honestly. So P and then enter, even though that is the default. Defaults to partition number 1. Okay, that's fine. That's what I'll create. First sector, we could just press enter here. And then it wants the last sector. Now for this, we could just press enter and it's going to take the entire flash drive, or we can go ahead and give it a specific size. So what I'm going to do is walk you through an interesting scenario here. I could do plus, let's just do 7 gigabytes or something like that. So I'll do plus 7G, even though it wrapped here. I'm basically going to create a partition that is 7 gigabytes. I'll press enter. And it's going to warn me that the partition table still contains an entry there that has that allocated as being an ext4 partition, but that's okay. I'll just go ahead and press Y and then enter for yes. And we can see here that we have that partition. Now what I'm going to do is do N for new again. I'll accept the default here of primary. Partition number 2, enter. First sector, that's fine, I'll press enter. Last sector, I'm going to press enter so that it takes the remainder of the drive. If I print, you can see we have 2 partitions on this device. Now what I'm going to do is change the type of the second partition. And to do that, you could do T for type. I'll press enter. Partition number, I'm going to change the second partition. And now it wants me to give it the type that I want that partition to be set to. If I do capital L and then enter, it's going to give us an overview of all the different partition types that we could choose. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that a partition that is going to be acceptable on other platforms. Basically, a partition that can be readable on something like macOS or Windows, things like that. And in my case, I'm going to go ahead and use C for FAT32. But depending on the size of your flash drive, it might be more appropriate to use option 7, which is exFAT. But this is only a 7-point-something gigabyte partition, so that should be fine. Press enter and print. And we can see that we have a Linux partition type and a Windows partition type. We can't actually use it yet because by creating a new partition table, I've wiped out all the data on this drive. So I'll write the new partition table here and we'll go ahead and get it formatted. Now again, this is what our current layout looks like. We have SDC1 and SDC2. So what I'm going to do is format SDC1, so that's simply sudo makefs or mkfs.ext4/dev/SDC1. I can also do -L for label. I'm going to call it Linux backup. Press enter. Now let's go ahead and get the Windows partition formatted, but just to make sure, I'm going to run sudo fdisk-l again. And if you look at this, it actually changed to SDB. Now it was SDC. Just keep an eye on that. And let's go ahead and format that second partition. So what I will do is sudo mkfs.fat for fat -32-i/dev sdb2-n, and I'm going to name it Windows Backup, just like that, and then press enter. Let's see if it works. And so far, so good. So let's go ahead and get this mounted. So first of all, I'm going to make a new directory. So right now, the mount directory is empty, so I'll do sudo mkdir/mount mnt, and then I'll type Linux part, just like that. And then I'll do the same thing, and I'll just name it win part. Now what I can do is sudo mount/dev sdb1. I'm going to mount that at /mnt, Linux part, just like that, and then enter. And now I'm basically going to do the same thing. I'm going to run sudo mount, you guessed it, sdb2, and you guessed it, /mnt win part. So now, if I do df-h, we can see that I have both of these partitions right here mounted. Then I can type mount, and then I can grep for SDB to narrow down the results to anything related to the flash drive. So let's see if it shows it properly. And it looks good to me. We have the first partition, and I have it mounted at the Linux part directory, type ext4. And then I have the second partition mounted here in this win part directory, type vfat. So what this basically allows us to do is have a single flash drive that has a dedicated partition for Linux and also one for Windows as well, which can be incredibly useful if you are supporting multiple machines of multiple different operating systems and you want to make sure that you have one flash drive you can use on each. And this is one of the ways that you can accomplish that. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove the flash drive, so I will do sudo umount dev sdb1, and then I'll do the same thing for the second one as well. And now let's go ahead and talk about the fstab file. If I go ahead and cat the contents of it, it's at /etc fstab, and here it is. This particular file is responsible for mounting partitions at boot time. So if you wanted something to be automatically mounted, that's definitely the file that you would basically edit to achieve that. So what I'm going to do is make a backup copy of it. Just to be on the safe side. And that's important because if we mess up this file, our system won't boot again. So this is very important that we take a lot of time and make sure that we're doing this correctly and with care. So let's go ahead and edit the file. You can see that we have several entries here. We have one for the root file system. In my case, we have one for home. We don't want to mess with these. But we do want to add a new entry here if we want to automatically mount something. Now, first of all, we need to basically tell it where to find the device. So what we could do, /dev/sdb1 for the first partition, and then I could just fill out the rest, but we don't want to do that actually. And there's a really important reason for that, because you remember the flash drive was SDC at one time. It changed later in the recording process to SDB. So that is a device name that can change. If we hard code that here, then we might get into a situation where it can't boot if that name was to change. So let me get out of this file real quick. I won't save the changes. Now what we can do is use the block ID command to get the universally unique identifier for the storage volume. So that way we can refer to it by a name that will not change. So we can simply do blkid /dev sdb1, then enter, and it gave us no output. Why? Well, because I should have ran that with sudo, so I'll just use that trick right there to rerun the previously executed command, but with sudo. And now we get the UUID right here that's specific to this particular partition. And it's much safer to refer to it by that than anything else. So now, let's go ahead and edit that fstab file and go back to the end. And just like we have right here, we're going to basically do the same thing. I'm going to paste that in right here. So now we have the UUID. Where do we want to mount that? Let's mount that at /mnt/linux_part, that directory we created earlier. The type is ext4. We'll just use defaults on that. And then 0, 0. And in fact, let's just make that 0, 1. It's a lower priority for file system checking. Basically, that's what we're setting. But I'm not going to get into that in this video. So we'll go ahead and leave it as it is for now. So we can go ahead and save the file, then exit out. Now let's make sure it isn't mounted at this time. So just like before, I'll run mount, and then I will grep for SDB and press enter. Just to make sure the name didn't change again. It didn't. It is SDB, so we know it's not mounted. So now what we can do is sudo mount /mnt/linuxpart and press enter. And it worked. We can even see that when we do df-h, it's listed here, but how? I didn't even type /dev/sdb1. How the heck did that work? Well, the reason why that worked is because we added the entry to the fstab file. If I was to do the same thing with the other directory, sudo mount /mnt and then winpart, it's going to fail, and it even tells you why. It can't find it in the fstab file. So just like before, we can do sudo blkid for the block ID /dev sdb2, and it has a smaller UUID. That's okay. Just go ahead and copy it anyway. We'll edit that file, the fstab file again. And at the end of the file, UUID equals, go ahead and paste that in there. Where do we want to mount it to? Well, /mnt win_part. The type is going to be vfat. I'm just pressing space each time here. Defaults 0, 1. That should be good enough. Let's see if I've made any mistakes. So I will go ahead and save the file, and exit out. And what we can do now is try to mount the second directory. So we can do sudo mount, and then that path. See what happens. Well, I mean, it certainly looked like it worked. It didn't error. So yeah, it worked. Both of them are mounted. And I could also do sudo umount, then the folder names. Just recall that. I'm too lazy to retype it. Enter again. And now we can see that those partitions are not mounted at this time. Now, one trick we can do actually is sudo mount and then -a and then enter. And then if we check what's mounted, they're both mounted. Now, why did that work? So in the fstab file, we added these entries, as you already know. And what mount-a does is it will mount anything in the fstab that's not specifically marked to not be auto-mountable, and it'll go ahead and just mount it. It goes through the file, just make sure everything is mounted. As a good rule of thumb, it's a very important thing to unmount your extra storage volumes before running mount-a, because you want to make sure that it is actually working. If something is mounted, it won't try to do it again. So if you have any mistakes, long story made short, you'll catch them better if you have everything that you don't need unmounted when you test that. And again, I just ran sudo mount-a just like that. Okay, so obviously when it comes to Linux storage, it gets way more complicated than this. Again, I have a video about LVM, which is even more awesome, that you should probably check out already on my channel. But I think that this is a great start for you. Just go ahead and practice formatting partitions and mounting volumes to your CentOS installation. Just be careful that you don't format the wrong thing. I've done it. Believe me, it's not fun. Always have backups and you should be fine. Now anyway, with that out of the way, thanks so much for watching this video. I will see you again real soon. I have a bunch of videos on my hard drive that I'm editing right now that are going to be making their way up to the channel very soon. I can't wait. So subscribe if you haven't already done so, and then I'll see you in the next video.